Welcome to the course Introduction to Biology. Let us start with the first chapter, Evolution. Life on Earth originated and then evolved from a universal common ancestor approximately 3.7 billion years ago. Repeated speciation and the divergence of life can be inferred from shared sets of biochemical and morphological traits or by shared DNA sequences. These homologous traits and sequences are more similar among species that share a more recent ancestor and can be used to reconstruct evolutionary histories using both existing species and fossil record. Biological evolution is change in the properties of population of organisms that transcend the lifetime of a single individual. The ontogeny of an individual is not considered evolution. Individual organisms do not evolve. So how can we define evolution? Evolution is any change across successive generations in the inherited characteristics of biological populations. Evolutionary processes give rise to diversity at every level of biological organization, including species, individual organisms, and molecules such as DNA and proteins. One early evolutionist, Lamarck, proposed a form of evolution in 1800. He suggested that organisms could acquire needed characteristics for changing environments, an idea that has been laughed off by history. But his views were actually more nuanced than modern accounts usually relate. All organisms on Earth are descended from a common ancestor or ancestral gene pool, you can say. Current species are in a stage of in the process of evolution, with their diversity the product of a long series of speciation and extinction events. So the common descent of organisms was first deduced from our four simple facts about organisms. First, they have geographic distributions that cannot be explained by local adaptation. Secondly, the diversity of life is not a set of completely unique organisms, but organisms that share morphological similarities. And third, the vestigial traits with no clear purposes resemblance functional ancestral traits. And finally, the organisms can be classified using these similarities into hierarchy of nested traits. So more recently, evidence for common descent has come from the study of biochemical similarities between organisms. For example, you can say all living cells have the same basic set of nucleotides and amino acids. So the history of life was that the unicellular or the unicellular eukaryotes, prokaryotes and archaea until about 610 million years ago, when multicellular organisms began to appear in the ocean and in the Ediacaran period. But it was about 500 million years ago, plants and fungi colonized the land and were soon followed by arthropods and other animals. Insects were particularly successful and even today make up the majority of animal species. Amphibians first appeared around 364 million years ago, followed by early amniotes and birds around 155 million years ago, and mammals around 129 million years ago, homininae around 10 million years ago, and modern humans, that is us, it was around 250 years ago. That evolution, they evolved before 250 years ago. So one such theory which has been recognized as or has been called as the theory of evolution was Darwin's. Darwin was the one who has put forward the theory of evolution. Darwin unveiled his theory in 1859 in his book on the origin of species by means of natural selection. Through his keen insights as a biologist, Darwin was able to demonstrate the scientific basis for evolution. It was called a concept called as natural selection. When he observed in different species, he saw that variation in every population, that variation was there in every population, and that within these groups, there is competition for limited resources such as food, water, shelter, and shelter from predators. So the creatures that survive this struggle for existence pass on their favorable heritable traits to their offsprings. And because of this, more offsprings were produced that can survive the process of natural selection. So this process, that is this process of natural selection, later came to be known as the survival of the fittest. Mainly Darwin's process of natural selection has four main components. That one is variation, inheritance, high rate of population growth, and differential survival and reproduction. Another one, a group of experiment was conducted in 1953 by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey, who was working at the University of Chicago, conducted an experiment which would say that changed the approach of scientific investigation into the origin of life. Miller took molecules which were believed to represent the major components of the early Earth's atmosphere and they put them into a closed system. The gases they used were methane, ammonia, hydrogen, and water. So, analysis of this experiment was done by chromatography. Miller's experiment showed that organic compounds such as the amino acids, which are essential to the cellular life, could be made easily under the conditions that scientists believed to be present on the early Earth. So this was one experiment which proved that yes, there are organic compounds such as amino acids which are essential for the life can be made under conditions that is believed to be present on the early Earth. Next is biological classification. It can be called or as a system which is used to organize and codify all life on Earth. We need a system that is called as biological classification. Creating a system of classification allows scientists to examine the relationship between various organisms and to construct evolutionary trees to explore the origin of life on Earth and relationship of modern organisms of historical examples. So the system of biological classification used today was developed by Linnaeus and he was an 18th century scientist. The Linnean hierarchy of biological classification that is named after Linnaeus, so that's why it's called as Linnean hierarchy of biological classification. So it contains 7 basic nested sets of taxa or taxonomic categories, namely kingdom, phyla, class, order, family, genus, and species. Each level of the hierarchy is considered as a taxa, and multiple taxons are called taxa. So these information, that is the biology to make this biological classification, scientists took this obtained data from different ways. That they took data from comparative anatomy, cellular ultrastructure, comparative embryology, comparative biochemistry, molecular sequencing, comparative cytology, and paleontology. They coupled all the information from these data to set up the biological classification system. So systematic use only these systems to explain the species, like the species name, for example, for example Panthera pardus that is name of the one of the genus name is Panthera and the species name is Pardus. So species names are always italicized or underlined, and the genus name is also italicized or underlined. So this is one of the classifications which we are used now to, or it can be called as the taxonomy is used to define the Latin names of the organism.